This is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. My name is Andy Steele, and I am the host. Tonight, we're joined by Lawrence Ray Coleman. He's an environmental health, safety, and security manager, and he worked with his family's company there at Ground Zero in the aftermath of the event of 9/11, doing demolition work there. He's got a lot to say about the issue, and he's one of the recent signatories to AE 9/11 Truth's petition calling for a new investigation into the destruction of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center 7 on September 11th. I'll be bringing that interview to you in just about 20 minutes or so. First, I want to spend this opening time on the show tonight going over a white paper that I knew about when it first came out, but we really haven't highlighted this in a long time here on the show. This was published on AE 9/11 Truth's website back in 2014. It's called 25 Points of Specific Concern in the NIST World Trade Center Reports. A white paper on NIST omissions, distortions, and fraud. And a lot of times when I do the show, I try to recommend materials that I think would help the activists in their outreach, in particular to the people in the building trades industries, professionals, professors of engineering, those folks that we really need to get on board to look at this evidence, to sign the petition. And I usually recommend the movies, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, Blueprint for Truth, or the 52-page Beyond Misinformation booklet. That was just written a few years ago, really puts the evidence in a compact way into one volume. People can read it in one sitting if they choose. Really lays it out good. So we can add this to the list of materials. You can actually get it for free online just by printing out the article. Well, the article begins, in recent years, various members of AE 9/11 Truth team have been working on a white paper titled Areas of Specific Concern in the NIST WTC reports. Last month, they finally completed the document. Its 25 concise points offer the most convincing proof that the reports produced by the National Institute of Standards and Technology on September 11, 2001, destruction of the 3 World Trade Center buildings, were unscientific and fraudulent. The authors of the 25 points designed the document to provide material that would compel the convening of a grand jury. Whether or not a grand jury is ever impaneled in any jurisdiction, though, readers of this paper will have the duty and privilege of acting as a virtual grand jury in all jurisdictions. After weighing the evidence meticulously laid out in the 25 points, readers can, by their resulting actions, help determine whether there will one day be a fully funded, truly independent, wholly transparent, and unimpeachably honest investigation of 9/11. And basically the paper does exactly what it claims to do. It lays out problems with the NIST reports, the justifications for a new investigation. So it's a pretty long paper. I'm not going to read all of it to you, but I am going to go over the points, the 25 points, and just kind of give my own 2 cents on them. One of the first 2 points, and it breaks it down into sections. It's got World Trade Center 7, the third skyscraper, and then all 3 buildings. So we're just going to focus on Building 7 right now for the moment. But the first 2 points is it's got omission of girder stiffness shown on the Frankel drawing and omission of 3 lateral support beams on the 13th floor. And this gets into the missing structural features issue. The fact that NIST left out parts of the building, as simple as you can put it, in order to make their hypothesis on what happened work. They claim that beams around the corner of the building or on column 79 heated up, expanded, pushed the girder off its seat, and that this caused the collapse of the building. The interior fell first, the exterior afterwards. According to NIST, that's why it looks like a straight down symmetrical collapse. Of course, this doesn't work because for the interior to fall, you'd have to see some massive warping on the outside of the building. You don't see that. You just see it all fall as one unit. But regardless, omitting information in order to make a preconceived conclusion work is not science. It's the opposite of science. All right, it's politics. It's propaganda. It's providing the people a false narrative in order to perpetuate a lie. So that is the opposite of science, but let's just give NIST the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that their omissions of these critical building features were a mistake, that they meant to do good work. They made these mistakes. So, it wasn't their fault. It was just a simple accident. No malice there. Okay, fine. But then correct the errors. Rerun the analysis. Incorporate the missing structural features. NIST has refused to do so up to this point in history. Dr. William Pepper, a famous attorney, wrote a letter to the Department of Commerce Inspector General about this. And as far as I know, it has not made any traction. And NIST has not acted on this newly discovered information, newly discovered within the last couple of years. All right, the omission of these structural features. You can't get away with that. Well, maybe NIST can. Maybe the U.S. government can. But you shouldn't be able to get away with that, in particular when you're dealing with the biggest mass murder in U.S. history. I know that they claim nobody died in Building 7, but still, it's a part of the crime. It's a part of the event, a big part of the event, because nobody can explain why this building just suddenly came down. So you got to look into it. You can't just ignore it. Number 3, WTC-7 collapse at freefall acceleration is not explained. Now let's not forget that the omission of freefall of Building 7 happened because of David Chandler asking his question at the technical briefing when NIST released its World Trade Center 7 report. As this white paper says, they were forced into a public acknowledgement. However, there is no attempt in the report to confront the implications that there could not have been any structural resistance during this 8-story fall at gravitational acceleration. Since every other skyscraper in history that has fallen in the manner in which WTC-7 did was an explosive controlled demolition, and since there is abundant eyewitness testimony of explosions in molten iron as well as chemical evidence of incendiaries found in the debris pile, one would expect NIST to at least consider the possibility of explosive or incendiary use and test for them, according to the NFPA. So they were forced to acknowledge it when David Chandler publicly embarrassed them, but they don't acknowledge the implications of it. It's just sort of a lukewarm acknowledgement and then an attitude almost projecting the idea that nothing to see here, let's just move on. That is not what you would expect from a government that is tasked with investigating this important incident in our history. You would expect them to seize upon the implications, to delve into it further. You would expect the newspapers to splash it across their front pages the next morning. At least the second pages, even if they're not fully convinced yet. It provides a reason for delving into it further, but they did not. Instead, they finalized the report, closed it to public comment after a certain time, and now politicians use the reports as a shield. They don't even use the NIST reports. They cite the 9/11 Commission usually, even though when talking about the buildings, it would be proper to cite the NIST reports, but it's not even proper to cite the NIST reports. You want to actually challenge the NIST reports because they're highly flawed, as we're pointing out here. Number 4. Videos of the collapse of World Trade Center 7 betrays NIST's computer models. I think this part is hilarious if it wasn't such a serious issue. But as the white paper says, the exterior of the NIST WTC-7 computer model shows large deformations as would be expected in a natural collapse, which are not observed in the video of the actual event. There's no attempt in the report to explain this discrepancy. Folks, if you watch this computer model, it kind of twists and does not look like what we saw in the real world. So if we didn't have videos rolling on World Trade Center 7 the moment it came down, people might be satisfied with what NIST gave us. But in real life, what happened was the entire thing came down as one unit, straight down, symmetrical, free fall acceleration for 105 feet, just like a typical controlled demolition. So NIST is trying to explain why this happened, and their own computer models don't even jive with reality. And they just sort of overlook it. It's so bizarre. You can tell when someone's gotten away with lying for a very long time, even the obvious lies are glazed over, unacknowledged, It's the height of arrogance to be able to push a story like this, even when their own materials contradict them. Number 5, claims of investigating controlled demolition without testing for explosive residue. I'm still baffled by the fact that they've gotten away with this. I would think that most Americans would assume that they would have tested for explosives in the World Trade Center dust in the immediate aftermath of the September 11th attacks. I mean, not even just like in the years that followed, and the years it took to formulate the NIST reports. I would have assumed back then that in the week that followed September 11th, somebody would have scooped up some dust or done whatever proper tests to get at the truth of how these buildings came down, just to rule it out. You would think this would be part of a regular criminal investigation. I mean, before we go rushing into war to avenge the event, we should have a better idea of not just who did it, but how it was done. Prevent something like this from happening again in the future. But NIST did not look for explosives. They didn't bother to. You know what their logic was? They said that they don't need to look for explosives because they don't expect to find any. All right, that kind of logic doesn't make sense. That only makes sense if you're trying to perpetuate a cover-up. If you're trying not to look for the most obvious hypothesis. Trying to look away from it, get everyone to believe something else that is less likely to have happened. I actually asked Tom Ridge about this on C-SPAN, talking about the iron microspheres found in the World Trade Center dust. And I didn't even ask him about Building 7. I just said, what rational basis did the federal government have for not testing the dust in the immediate aftermath of the World Trade Center attacks, testing it for incendiaries or explosives? And Tom Ridge's answer, this is a former Homeland Security Secretary in the Bush administration, his answer was, well, that would be within my scope, but if there's some kind of implication that the Twin Towers were brought down with explosives, I reject that categorically. That's not an answer. The question is, why don't you test the dust samples for explosives? And to acknowledge that that's within your scope to be able to answer, but you refuse to do it because of the implications that they're explosives, is not an answer. All right, only in the federal government can they get away with answering to their bosses in this fashion. I mean, because that's what we're supposed to be, is their bosses, right? I mean, that's what we're taught from wee little days growing up in school until now, that the American people run the show. I guess not. Number 6, changes of statements on composite beams and shear stud use between drafts. A technical statement. NIST draft WTC 7 report said most of the beams and girders were made composite with the slabs through the use of shear studs. Typically, the shear studs were 0.75 inches in diameter by 5 inches long, spaced to 1 to 2 feet on the center. However, in the final WTC 7 report, NIST says shear studs were not used on the girders. The significance here is that they claim the 13th floor A2001 girder was pushed off its seat at column 79 by thermally expanded beams from the east side of the building. If shear studs had been used on the girder, it would have been impossible for the beams to push the girder off its seat with the column. No drawings are shown in the final report to substantiate this new claim. So it's omitted structural features again. Right? They have to look at all of the evidence. They have to look at all of the features that were a part of this building, not just omit parts of the building because it doesn't go along with their agenda, with what they're trying to convince the public happened here. Refusing of FOIA requests. This is number 7. A registered structural engineer's Freedom of Information Act request to NIST for calculations and analysis substantiating the walk-off failures of horizontal members from their seats at column 79 and 81 was denied in January 2010 by the director of NIST, who claimed that releasing this data might jeopardize public safety. Now, Richard Gage, AIA, our CEO and founder, debunked this claim by NIST that it would jeopardize public safety perfectly when he was interviewed on television, saying that the architects and engineers who design these types of buildings need this information in order to make buildings more safe. And indeed, delving deeper into that, there is no public safety risk, in particular for a building that no longer exists. The only public safety risk maybe is to the public reputation of NIST, the faith people have in their federal government and the people that are tasked with investigating such things. They might lose faith in those institutions. That's the only risk. But we have a even bigger risk by not releasing it, by not knowing what happened, by not being able to check NIST facts and check its data. I mean, we've got a World Trade Center 7 study coming out, and all the information is going to be out there for everyone to check, even the people who oppose us. All right, so model versus model, which one are you going to listen to? I know which one I'm going to listen to, which is going to have more weight behind it. This goes on for 25 points, but we're getting to a point now in this intro where I got to play the interview for you, so we are going to finish this up at some point. I'm going to leave it here at number 8, but you can check this out again. The article is 25 points of specific concern, and the NIST WTC reports a good reference when you're citing why we need a new investigation into the destruction of the Twin Towers in Building 7. All right, the interview with our guest is coming right up. Stay tuned.
The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Lawrence Ray Coleman is an environmental health and safety and security manager, and he's worked with his family's controlled demolition company for 21 years. They were the consultants for the Ground Zero cleanup, and he worked at Ground Zero from November to January after the event happened. He's worked on numerous implosions, including the IRS building in Atlanta, Cincinnati Stadium, the Robert E. Lee Bridge in Virginia, and the Presbyterian Hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina, just to name a few. He's also served in the North Carolina National Guard, earning the Combat Action Badge and the Bronze Star. He's one of the most recent signatories to the AE 9/11 Truth petition calling for a new investigation into the destruction of Building 7 and the Twin Towers on September 11th, 2001. We're going to be learning more about him today, but Ray, I just want to welcome you to 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you. Good to be here.
All right, so lead us off by telling us more about your professional background.
All right, well, the company that I worked for was D.H. Griffin Wrecking Company. It's a family-owned business. My grandfather, father, aunts, uncles, cousins, pretty much everybody in our family has worked there. I spent 21 years there, and we're not just a controlled demolition contractor. That's a small portion of any of the entire demolition field. Our main business was regular conventional demolition, interior strip outs, things of that nature, but it's big commercial projects. We did get into imploding buildings and actually hired a guy from CDI, which is the Wazo family. They're the ones that pioneered the implosion of buildings. We hired one of their experts that we did a lot of work with, and we used to use CDI as well. We hired him to come over, Steve Pettigrew, myself, Rusty Griffin, Gerald Mullane, and 2 or 3 other guys that we started at the imploding side for D.H. Griffin. It was actually called Demolition Dynamics. I did that for about 3 years. Off and on throughout my career, though, I would be called in to help, even before we had our own implosion company, just to help on our buildings, to help prepare the buildings. It's a tremendous amount of work goes into this when you implode a building. And then after you do all the work, you still hope and pray it goes good. So that's a little bit of my background in that. I got to have demolition side, and we also had recycling, scrap metal yards, things of that nature, landfills. And I got into construction safety, and I left the family business behind. And I've worked for KDR, CH2M Hill, Jacobs Engineering, and now currently with Black & Veatch as a division manager for them.
Yeah, and those are a lot of companies that were involved in the post 9/11 world. What a lot of our activists and researcher audience has kept track of since the event happened. And you hear these names of these companies always in the background involved in the reconstruction projects, like in Iraq and Afghanistan and all those places. And yeah, you were like right there in the thick of it. Interestingly enough, I really want to zero in on this. It was your time with the North Carolina Army National Guard. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I was in the, first off, I was in the Navy Seabees Reserve Unit out of Greensboro, North Carolina. I decided to go over to North Carolina National Guard to get a commission to go the officer route. And I went to orientation, decided I just want to stay enlisted, and I kept my rank. They went from a first-class petty officer to a staff sergeant, which is E6 in the Army. And I was activated, mobilized, sent to Iraq. And 2005, I spent 2005 and 6 in Camp Anaconda, Balad, Iraq. I was a gun truck team commander. I had 4 gun trucks, 12 soldiers, myself, and we did missions in a 50-mile area of operation around Camp Anaconda. We did over 100 missions that year outside the wire, and I was awarded the Combat Action Badge and a Bronze Star for my services while serving there.
Now, in your services, is there like a particular incident or something that led you to winning those awards?
Well, anytime you went outside the wire, 05 and 06, you can look it up. It was a very hot year for roadside bombs in that area. And we were hit several times that year. The worst thing that happened was the gunner lost his leg. And I had to have back surgery. So that was it. Our mission was anytime someone was blown up outside the wire, roadside bomb, under fire, needed help, needed to get back to the base. We were a quick reactionary team. We had to get out quick, get to these guys or the people that were blown up, secure the area, and get them back to the base as quick as possible with all the assets. And for that, for over 100 missions, and the way we conducted our missions, that's why I was awarded the Bronze Star.
I imagine you saw a lot, and I can't imagine what what it must be like out there in the war zone. I mean, what we see on television and little quick YouTube videos probably doesn't even capture, just like what it's actually be like out there in the field. And of course, it's something we try to avoid putting our soldiers through. You were there at Ground Zero, and you were involved in helping to clear up that site. So can you explain to the audience first your company's connection with that operation at Ground Zero?
All right. Well, I think everyone that's listening remembers that day. I know I'll never forget it, just like everyone else. We knew where we were at, what we were doing at the time, and how it affected us personally. My great uncle owns the company, D.H. Griffin Company, and my cousin, David Griffin Jr., when this happened, he got his wife and 3 kids, put them in the car, took off to New York. He made his way around the site, made some connections, and long story short, this happened on the 11th. On the 13th, we had people on site. So we were there from the 13th of September. I didn't get there till October 31st or 30th when I got there. And then we remained on site. I think we had an engineer on site until April of 2002. I left January 28th of 2002. I know it was kind of strange for us to be there, being a North Carolina contractor, but D.H. Griffin Company is one of the biggest demolition contractors in the industry. And we have a good reputation for the service that was provided and the management expertise that we had on staff.
So what kind of work did your company do down there? Explain to the audience what a day-to-day routine would be down there at Ground Zero for you and your crew.
We didn't have any equipment on site. Most of the time, it would be 2 to 3 of our people, including David Griffin Jr., on the day shift. And it would be myself or one of the other team members on the night shift duties. I was there at nighttime, but we were there to help guide the contractors on site. We had 4 main contractors, AMEC, Turner, Tolley, and Bovis, and each one of those were given a sector in the 16-acre site. Now, under these guys, they also had demolition companies that were local from around the area. It was Gateway Demolition, Mazzocchi Wrecking, Manafort, and I'll say this right, Yanuzzi Demolition. They actually had equipment on site. Mazzocchi and Gateway was the predominant demolition contractors on site, had the most equipment. Mazzocchi had some of the biggest excavators and trucks that we had getting debris and everything out of the site for the pit with. We were there just as a representative reporting directly to DDC. Mr. Mike Burton was our contact. He reported directly to Giuliani. And we just gave guidance and direction while we were there on site.
So this couldn't have been like a typical job for you. I'm amateur historian to a certain extent. I want to know just from your own observations and the feeling that you experienced down there, what was it like? What was it like being part of this major historical event and the cleanup for it?
Well, personally, I'll be honest with you, I'd never heard of the World Trade Center. I'm from the South. I kind of stayed in the South, and I'd never heard of that. That was my first trip going to New York, was actually go there to work at the cleanup. And I remember David Griffin Jr., I met him on the day shift, and we were standing out at the edge of the debris and everything, still smoking really bad, twisted steel everywhere. I mean, look, I can't even describe to you what it's like in real person. He looked at me and he said, "We've got 1 year to get this cleaned up." And I looked directly at him and said, "You crazy as hell. There's no way we'll do this in 1 year. Look around, David. It's like the end of the world here." But amazingly enough, it was done 5 months ahead of schedule, and everything was cleaned up in 7 months. And it was 2,000 workers on site, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, nonstop. We never stopped until it was finished.
Were there any special considerations that had to be made? I mean, I would imagine, I was always hoping that they would find more people in the rubble in the days that followed. So obviously, if others had that hope there at ground zero, it would seem like special consideration would need to be made as you're moving things around, that there could be somebody still alive beneath all that twisted metal that we saw down there. I mean, what kind of considerations and what was different about this job than others that you had experienced before?
Well, we had a lot to deal with. It was a lot of the family members were there every day, just in hopes that we'd find somebody alive, as you mentioned. And we all was hoping for that. I think deep inside everybody knew, as compacted as everything was, and debris and the twisted steel, and I mean, it was like javelins stuck down in the ground. Some of these areas that you wasn't going to find anyone. And the hardest part for me going into the site every day was having to walk past the crowds and the people and the families, and seeing people upset and crying, overhear them talking that hope they find mom today or a brother or something like that. And it was just really hard site to work on. As far as the actual demolition work or removal of the debris, it was a lot. Everything was unknowns. We didn't know where voids were at. We didn't know if there were pockets that a track excavator or a truck could roll over and disappear out of sight, which we had happen one night. We had an excavator going across an area that we were told by the engineers that could be possible voids, and he just kind of fell out of sight. He didn't get hurt. It did shake him up pretty bad. That was some moments like that. It was kind of scary because you didn't know what to expect. I mean, it was like if you can imagine a bunch of pickup sticks, you got them all twisted up, and you just pull one out, and you try to do it without everything else collapsing.
God, that must have been so difficult. I can only imagine, and the experience of having to pick through all of that with those family members on the outskirts and walking past them, as you said. I think that's one of the most heartbreaking memories from that whole incident is the families on television with pictures of their loved ones paper clipped to their chests, or they're holding them, desperately trying to find them as the days pass and they don't hear from their people. The hope obviously fades, and it becomes assumed that they were lost in those towers. Of course, it was very difficult to identify most people, and there a lot of people were just remains. throughout there. Did you experience any of the finding of remains? I mean, were you there when remains were found?
Oh yeah, that was common every day. When I first got there, anytime remains were found, the entire site stopped work until the fire department would come in and they would recover the remains. They would cover what was found with a flag, and then everybody would stop work and until it got out of the pit. Then work would resume again. Well, it got to be to a point that we couldn't get work done. We was constantly stopping because we were constantly finding remains or someone. And we had to make a decision that we would only stop the work in the area where the remains were actually found or discovered. I mean, if we hadn't, it would take way too long to get everything cleaned up. And we would find remains in the area of digging. The excavators, in the beginning, we couldn't get trucks in to load the material into the trucks to get it out to West Street. So just imagine 7 or 8 huge track excavators in the road like a daisy chain. Excavator 1 would pick it up, put it down. Excavator 2, pick it up past the 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 till they got to West Street and dump it. That's how we got the roads built, access to get in to get our trucks in. Once we got that completed, we would put debris in the back of these gigantic trucks like you see in a rock quarry. The material would then be dumped out on West Street, where firemen would go through it again, and police officers and Port Authority personnel, volunteers, and they would find remains there after we'd already found remains at the original point. Then it was loaded back up again and sent to Fresh Kills landfill, where more remains was discovered and found. So I know it sounds kind of bad, but we were all everyone was in a recovery mode to save as many or get as many remains out as possible. But you miss things, you're working, you miss items or stuff of that nature, and it was a lot of remains found at Fresh Kills landfill.
Well, I can imagine they try to be respectful of the lives that were lost there, and as you said, stop all work on the site when they find remains, but then at some point you run into practicality issues of trying to get this all cleared in a certain amount of time, and certain decisions are made. They were finding remains even like years after the event. They found it, I believe, in an alleyway around some building. So it was just a massive devastation scene down there. And I went down there in December of 2001, and they were still cleaning up, and you really get a grasp of the scope of the damage. Even though we weren't allowed on the site, obviously, there was a big fence put up, but you can just get an idea of how big these towers were. I was there a year before, and I didn't even really pay attention to the Twin Towers. It was just sort of a landmark because we were trying to find somewhere else. I had no idea, obviously, that they would be gone in a year, but they were huge, massive, and then to have these reduced to just steel and dust in a matter of seconds, just truly devastating. And
it was so hard for me to believe they just collapsed on my airplane, because it was the heaviest steel I'd ever seen in my life, especially the core beams. I may not have this exact figure, but if I remember right, these core beams out of the basement levels were around 31 to 3,280 pounds a linear foot. That's what these beams weighed. They were massive. And I know each floor is 1 acre, and it had no columns inside it. It was all the floors were suspended on outside columns. But it was I don't know. I just never would have thought an airplane could bring something like that down.
Well, what kind of
I guess
question?
Everybody thought that.
Well, yeah, and nobody was questioning. I shouldn't say nobody, but the majority of the people weren't questioning what they were seeing that day. They were just in shock from everything that was happening, one thing after another that morning. And we didn't even have the internet. Well, we had the internet, but we didn't have it to the extent that we do now, where people could go out and independently raise these kinds of questions. People weren't even in that mindset back then. Did you have any suspicions while you're working out there? Anything you observed that seemed off to you?
The only thing that seemed suspicious or strange to me is, like I said, just size of the steel and the strength of it, and to see it twisted around like dish rags, I mean, it was hard to believe. Even harder to believe that most people don't consider or think about was part of that. We had towers 1 and 2 with the Marriott Hotel, which is 3. We had 4, 5, and 6. I think 5 had like a record shop inside it, and 6 had a big section. We had 2 presidential limousines come out of there and a bunch of stored ammo and a lot of federal things inside that. Those didn't collapse, but 7, which was nowhere in the sight there, did collapse. And 7 was a 47, 48-story building. I forget what it was now, but it was a totally different structure than the towers were. It was a normal concrete, steel structured building with columns inside it. Now, I'll say this because I know imploding buildings, when we go in to implode a building, that would be months of preparations. I mean, we would have to take walls out. Sometimes we cut sections of floors out. If it's concrete, we'll have to drill roughly 5 holes in each column, and we'll load it, 2 sticks of dynamite in the bottom, stick and a half the next, stick, quarter stick, so on, in each column. If it's a steel structure, we'll use linear shape charges that's copper clad, and they're designed in the manner that you put standoffs on these, and you attach opposing charges, one on each side of the beam with big rubber bands to hold them in place. And when they go off, it's like a hot knife going through butter. It cuts through that steel like it's a laser. Having said all that, how 7 collapsed, it's just always baffled me. And I know not a lot of people talk about it or maybe question it. I'm not sure. I haven't really looked into it that much. But it always seems strange to me.
Exactly. So, and this is very important for audience members to realize, but not just a regular audience. Anybody who might be a casual observer to this conversation may not be very familiar with this issue. Many times when I first started waking up to the issues surrounding the Twin Towers and Building 7, I used to discuss this with a guy who would take a debunker position, and he would argue each point, and when you got to Building 7, he would brush it off and say, well, I don't know, that's probably just something we don't need to know about. Almost acknowledging, like, yeah, it probably was a controlled demolition, but there's probably a logical reason for it, and you don't get to do that, because it takes a long time to set up a building for a controlled demolition. You can't just do it in a morning, especially when you've got the event at the Twin Towers happening next door.
Yeah, no way. No, a building that size, I would say, I'm just roughly estimating, I would say 4 to 5 months preparations on that building. And that's knocking out walls, columns, sections of flooring, putting up thousands of steel cables. That's another part that we have to use when implode buildings. As one section's falling, that's what gives the rolling in effect. As the building's collapsing, you've got steel cables pulling on other sections of walls, because we had the charges set to go off in milliseconds from 0 to sometimes 30 milliseconds, depending on how we want to fall. But all that's timed to get it to fall a certain way. And the way that one fell, I mean, it looked like a perfect implosion, but I'm not a conspiracy person by no means, but I mean, I'm just calling it like it is. I've said that from the first time I saw it.
Now, NIST, that's the government agency tasked with investigating why these 3 buildings collapsed. It's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Their claim is that some fires in the corner of the building around a certain column caused the beams to expand and pushed the girder off its seat. So basically, boiled down, they say random office fires brought down. Now, if I walked into your company when you were with it and said, okay, I want to bring a building down, but I want to save money, I just want to start some fires with jet fuel and watch it come down, what would you say to me?
We'll laugh you out of the office. No way. I'll give you an example, a real-life example here. Kingsport, Tennessee, probably 1988, 89, somewhere along that time frame. We were called to implode a hotel. Well, this hotel was, it's like 5 or 6 stories, really not tall enough to implode in our minds, but they wanted to do it to. It seemed like the mayor wanted to have a show. So with the building being short like that, we loaded it up really heavy with dynamite. It was concrete columns of rebar. So we did our test shot, went good on one of the columns. We loaded up very heavy, just because we wanted to ensure that it would all break up and fall apart. And when we pushed the button and shot the building, it went from a 5-story or 6, whatever it was, to either a 4 or a 5. It's like one floor just come out, the building just sat there. I mean, even after all the work we had done, taking walls out, everything, preparing it, loaded it with dynamite, and it still didn't collapse. And if you look around at some implosions, if you look, you'll see where they don't always go perfect. You know, even with all the planning and preparations and explosives, they still don't come down sometimes.
No, I've watched those videos on YouTube. I'm sometimes entertained by them as long as nobody got hurt in the process. There's one classic one. It's a big white structure where they, they do some demolition work, but it doesn't quite come down. And it's just a testament to how much precision it takes just to make it happen when it's an acknowledged controlled demolition, that the probability of it happening like a controlled demolition naturally because of fire is so astronomically low that...
well, for one, you've got, by building codes, you've got spray-on material to protect the steel beams from heat in case there is a fire. So I don't know how they would ever argue that one. It just don't make sense. It don't add up. It was cleaned up fairly quick also, if you remember.
Well, that's a question I wanted to ask, actually, because we know a lot of the steel was shipped off to China. But from what you saw there firsthand, how much effort was made to preserve evidence and to actually look at that evidence?
From my perspective, I really can't say anything about that because I don't know. I mean, I just know a lot of it was sold to China. I really can't say about investigation. It seemed like we were just in a hurry to get it all done, get it out of there as quick as possible.
So years pass, obviously, people are talking, or begin to start talking about the questions surrounding the fall of these buildings. What did it for you? What raised questions in your mind and prompted you to learn more about the issue and to eventually sign the petition at AE 9/11 Truth?
To be honest with you, for years, even when I was on site, I didn't know about Building 7 collapsing until someone on site told me. I said, well, where is 7 at? They said, oh, it's across the street over here. It's not part of the pit. I said, well, how did it collapse, not the other buildings around it? Why was it just that one? And they said, man, we don't know. It's strange. It looked like it just imploded. And I remember seeing a video that really got me sparked. I think it was one of the owners of the building or something, and they're interviewing him, and a fire department or somebody comes on and says, hey, the building's not doing good. You want us to pull it? And he said, pull it. And then that's when it collapsed. And I don't know what happened when he said pull it or what was implied by that, but I do remember seeing that interview and the guy saying that. I don't know, that sparks a lot of interest with me. And I'd have to say that's the event that did it. It wouldn't actually be working inside the pit. What's really sparked my interest is 7, Building 7.
Now, since you started waking up to this over time, have you talked to others in your industry about this issue? And if so, what has been their response?
Yeah, I've talked to some of my people I work with there. Rusty Griffin. Rusty Griffin's one of the best. He's not a licensed engineer, one of the best demolition experts in the industry. I would trust any work he directed me to do or any job, I would put him on it. And we've talked about it. He just kind of laughed and shrugged his shoulders and not really, no comment, but that tells me a lot. It doesn't make sense to him either.
A lot of people who should have some opinion on this should weigh in, have remained silent. Even people who have not come out against us, but they've just sort of stayed on the sidelines and lived life, which I understand to a certain extent, because people like engineers, architects, people in the controlled demolition industry never probably imagined that they would be, that their profession would be in the middle of a controversy like this. I mean, if you're going to be a lawyer, some kind of journalist, a politician, these kind of professions, you expect that if you're successful, you're going to be put in the middle of some kind of controversy at some point, and you better just learn to deal with that. But people in the sciences, particularly engineering sciences, probably didn't expect that they would have to take a position on something that would be this controversial, this divisive within our society. So I understand it to a certain extent. But why do you feel that more controlled demolition experts haven't spoken out or taken an interest in studying this further than what the official story has given them as an explanation?
Yeah, well, I know the controlled demolition industry and using explosive demolition to bring structure down. It's a small community. I mean, Jack Lawazzo with CDI is the one that pioneered it. His two sons, Mark and Doug, worked directly under their father. When Jack passed away, they took it over. And now I think it's Mark's daughter that's pretty much run the company now. But it's them. It was Demolition Dynamics, our company, and it's a few other smaller companies or contractors that do it. But CDI is the predominant biggest player in the field, in the community, and rightfully should be. They're the ones that it's their baby. They pioneered it. I don't know why people maybe haven't looked at it, but I'm sure in their minds they've had the thoughts just like crossed my mind. They've had the same thoughts in their mind before. I tell you, to be honest with you, the only reason I signed your petition and I looked into this, because I saw all these engineers and professionals, everybody involved. It's not a lot of, kooks that's out here on the side of the street yelling out petitioning, trying to get you to sign something or to get you to believe something. I mean, these are all professional architects, engineers, people that's well known in the industry. And for them to have suspicion and to think something that it kind of sealed my mind with what suspicions I had personally myself, because I mean, I've worked around this stuff my whole life. I've imploded buildings. I know what goes into it. I've been the new construction side for the past 17 years now, 16 years. I know what it takes to build the structures now, and it's not something that comes down easy.
No, it certainly does not, and I appreciate the nod to AE 9/11 Truth and to the professional way that it goes about this issue. It is important to highlight the expertise of the now nearly 3,000 architects and engineers who have signed the petition at AE911truth.org, and the approach of not simply standing in the street screaming at people, but approaching people, talking to them about the evidence, appealing to their common sense, their logic, talking about the science, letting them come to their own conclusions. And I feel that when you tune down the passion associated with this issue, people will come to reality, come to the truth, and at least call for a new investigation, which is exactly what we are looking for.
I think from my personal standpoint, I think so much focus was put on the 16-acre pit and towers 1 and 2. 7 kind of slid through the cracks, kind of behind the scenes. There wasn't no big press talks or a lot of focus on 7. I mean, if you think back, I mean, it wasn't in my mind. Everything was towers 1 and 2.
Well, and the media for many years really tried not to show 7. I mean, I watched 7 come down on television, not thinking too much about it on the day of 9/11. But then afterwards, it was a struggle just to get the media to show Building 7 coming down again. I remember Stephen Jones, former professor at BYU of physics, was on Tucker Carlson's show, and they had asked him ahead of time, what video do you want us to show? And he said the video of Building 7 coming down, and they wouldn't play it for him for whatever reason. So it's been very difficult, not just to show Building 7 coming down on television, but to even get the media to cover this issue in a fair and open way. Now, I understand you're not an expert on media in the Western world, but just what's your own take on that?
I agree. I mean, I think the media, I guess so much focus put on towers 1 and 2 because and the pit because of all the fatalities and how devastating it was. And 7, I don't know of anyone being killed that was in Building 7. I mean, everybody was evacuated out of the building. But you're right. I mean, it wasn't a lot of focus on that, and everybody kind of dances around the issue. They don't talk about it for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, yeah, and it was just sort of the forgotten tower until AE 9/11 Truth took up the mantle and started reminding people, did you know a third tower fell on September 11th? Most people don't know about it. So, I mean, that's an important threshold to cross with anyone, just enlightening them of that simple fact. Usually I just show people the building falling first and ask them what do they think brought the building down. And they will say, explosives, bombs, and then I tell them that's the third tower that fell on 9/11, and the government says fire did that. And you see that look on their face, questioning, and then usually they'll end up agreeing, and sometimes they even sign the petition afterwards.
I'll be honest with you, I looked at your site several times before I actually signed the petition because I was reluctant. But I kept something inside me, this just keep going back to building 7, just something's fishy, something don't sit right with me.
Well, it doesn't sit right with our audience either, so that's why we're keeping this alive for so many years. I want to get your view on this. Why do you think it's still important to raise these questions about 9/11 even 16 years after it took place?
Well, I think it's because a lot of questions have been asked. It kind of a lot of interest been sparked in this, but no one's given any answers. It's a lot of unknowns. And I think the longer people don't answer it, the more time people get to have their own doubts and raise questions in their mind and get more people involved. Eventually somebody's got to say something. Something's got to come out because the story being told now, I don't believe that's correct for that one.
No, and 9/11 affected our country so much and changed the course of its destiny that we need to get it right. I mean, if there's any questions surrounding this event whatsoever, the American people deserve to have them answered. They should be looking at all the evidence, no matter where it leads, making their input data on World Trade Center 7 computer models available. I don't know if you know this, but NIST will not honor Freedom of Information Act requests for their input data and their computer models of Building 7 because they said it would jeopardize public safety if they were to release it. I'm just curious, what kind of jeopardizing of public safety could there possibly be? Do you have any insight on that?
To me, that's just an answer. We're not going to give you no information. Just don't ask no more. That's the way I take that one.
Well, that's how I take it, too. Now, you said when you wrote to us that you're very patriotic, and you receive medals for your service in the military, in the North Carolina National Guard. What do you have to say to those who question the patriotism of people like ourselves, yourselves, people who raise questions about the fall of these towers in New York on 9/11?
Well, I would say I'm a very professional person. I'm educated. I've got professional certifications. I've served my country when asked and reserve CDs, as well as the Army National Guard. When I was mobilized, I was under 10th Mountain Division. Had a very critical job and task that I performed, me and my soldiers, while we were there. Out of the 1,200-man task force we was attached to, only about 48 of us went outside the wire and actually left Camp Anaconda. So I think I have the right to say I'm patriotic. I feel like I've deserved it. I've earned it. And I'm not trying to be some conspiracy weirdo out here trying to come up with some stuff that I don't believe in. I mean, I have a very professional job now. And I'm just, the only reason I'm raising this up for signs of petition is because I honestly, in my heart, feel something's not right with how Building 7 come down. It just, I've tried to evaluate everything and look at it, try to come up with reasons how it could happen, and I just can't come up with anything. Nothing adds up. If you talk to anyone in demolition business, I think you'll get the same kind of answer, especially people who've worked on the implosion side of the business.
And what do we stand for in this country, if not for being able to raise these questions and have government answer to us? Because it is we the people in this nation. And if we have reasonable questions, these are very reasonable. They'll try to claim on the other side that they're not, but they are, and they can't answer for them. They obfuscate, ignore facts, keep all their data secret. So, I don't know, we're the reasonable side. We're simply raising these questions. We know there's something fishy. We need a new investigation. That's what we've been asking for years. That's what the families of the victims deserve. That's what people like our guest here who went and served in the post-9/11 wars deserve. for their service. There is no reasonable reason not to have a new investigation, to get to the bottom of this, to settle these questions. We've spent more money on more frivolous things in this country. Why can't we take the time to look back at the biggest mass murder in U.S. history and deal with these impossible collapses, figure out why these buildings came down the way they did, and look into the possible use of explosives. And NIST didn't even test their dust samples for the presence of incendiaries or explosives. They said they don't expect to find any, so they don't need to look for them. Just totally circular reasoning.
I mean, personally, from my standpoint, I worked at Ground Zero when that happened, 9/11. Spent my time there. I spent time in Iraq with the Army, time in Iraq working for KBR, 2 years in Afghanistan working for CH-2M Hill Bagram Airfield, 4 years in Saudi Arabia with Jacobs Engineering. So I've seen this from every aspect from the full circle, and I agree with you. It needs to be some answers.
And I know a lot of times people who have served are listened to by members of Congress, particularly people who have won medals like yourself. If any Congress member is listening to this program right now, what would you say to them? What would be your argument for looking into this matter and taking it up?
I would say that the investigation needs to be opened up. More people brought in from an expert field side, meaning controlled demolition contractors, engineers, people that's got professional insight and experience into this type of work. Get their input, open the investigation, and see what kind of results come out of that.
All right, Ray, any final thoughts to share with our audience today?
No, thank you for calling me. And like I said, I was reluctant to sign up at first, but I think you have a very, very good site. Seems like everyone involved is professional, highly credentialed, and I'm glad to be a member of it.
All right. Well, those are words to end it on. Ray Coleman, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you.
This program is on every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also keep track of the archives by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.